So here we are for our Sandbox presentation for March 11th, 2015. And tonight we'll continue drilling down on the various aspects. So far we have 6 aspects of meditation that we've been looking at. So tonight we'll drill down, and I think we'll stay with the conscious, subconscious a little bit longer so that we can prepare for a guided meditation that's related. And then, of course, after that, we'll pick one of the 9 guiding principles and drill down on that. So as I said, we're going to take a closer look at conscious and subconscious. And just to review what we've done up till now, we talked about the fact that to the subconscious mind, or part of you, time is not that critical. And as we divide time up into past, present, and future in our day-to-day state, to the subconscious, it treats time as just an experience and doesn't break it up. So time is not treated the same. So in a sense you could say to the subconscious it's timeless. We also looked at the fact that when you're probing the subconscious, asking questions, the subconscious will always try to give you an answer. It will never ignore you. It's always listening to you. And it will keep providing possible solutions or answers to your questions indefinitely until you release it. And one of the terms that is commonly used is to disconnect or release. And we have been doing a disconnecting or detachment meditation, which is practicing that skill of detaching a thought. We also last week talked about the fact that when you're communicating with your subconscious, you might want to consider doing it politely and compassionately without anxiety. So it's as if you're communicating with another part of yourself in a polite and respectful way. And this will give a quality to your answers, of course. So the answers will come back in the way that you ask them. So the other piece that's related to asking a question and knowing that you'll always get answers is to possibly, if possible, consider the first reply that you get. Just consider that, because quite often the very first reply you get back from your subconscious is pretty close to really what's happening. Don't have to go with it, but just give it some thought. And there are no rules here, of course, but I have found that when I probe myself for the subconscious, it usually gets good at providing answers right away. I might add at this point, one of the characteristics of really successful people is that they go with their subconscious responses pretty much all the time, and they get better and better at being more accurate. So successful people don't ponder a lot, they act. So I want to introduce 2 other aspects of communicating with the subconscious. The fact also that we introduce the unconscious realm, which extends beyond us. So the best way of tuning into the unconscious realm is with the subconscious, because the subconscious is awake all of the time and is not filtering. We consciously filter a lot of information, so if we're going to try to become in tune with what's going on with our greater aspect of all the things that we've implemented and started, it's best done through being communicating with the subconscious. So that could be one way of probing that realm. So there's a syntax for asking questions. The subconscious will parse out any questions we ask in a very interesting way. It doesn't apply logic to our questions. So whatever we ask, it assumes we want. It doesn't say, oh, well, Steve really doesn't want that, so I'm not going to do it. No, every question that you probe to yourself is considered as a valid question, and it also is considered as something that you want an answer to. So the syntax is very important, and here's just one basic rule. If possible, always ask for what you want. Always ask for what you want. Asking for what you don't want really is very confusing. It then makes the subconscious have to analyze it. So if you say, I don't want to be poor, I don't want to be sad, I don't want to be lonely, the subconscious will parse out the don't and will only hear sad, will only hear poor, and will only hear lonely. So, very important, structure your questions in terms of what you want. I want to have friends. I want to have relationships. I want to have success. How do I get success? How do I get friends? Ask questions that the end result is what you want. Okay? And that's pretty much it for the subconscious and how it interconnects with the greater unconscious realm. You can't ask questions of the unconscious realm, but you can ask questions of the subconscious. And it is aware 724, so to speak. So I guess the big take home here is that as you're meditating and as you're sitting in your contemplation period, to just be aware if you have questions out there or things you're trying to resolve, work through in yourself, and positioning your questions to yourself in a polite, compassionate, without anxiety, and parse so that the end result is what you want. Okay, I think we'll leave that there and go on to our ninth principle, our 9 principles. And I'm going to go back with the very first principle because if you can do number 1, you're probably going to be okay with all the other 8. And the first guiding principle is just being okay with whatever it is. So in our day-to-day reality, there will be things that will challenge us. Learning to adjust your day-to-day activities such that whatever it is that happens, whatever you're confronted with, you're going to be able to go on and keep working, doing your thing, and not letting that event or experience throw you into the not okay state. Because we've agreed that the best way of performing work and with relationships and play is to be in that okay state of mind, and that's the best way to deal with issues. So there is an interesting approach, a model for looking at how people become okay or not okay, and it's called transactional analysis. And there was a book published in 1964, Games People Play, by psychologist Eric Berne, and Berne, and it became quite popular. And what Eric had done is designed a method of using day-to-day language and kitchen soup type approach to looking at the ways people communicate. And so, as you can get from the title of his model, Transactional Analysis, he would like to analyze how people transact. And the end result of a transaction will be that you will either be okay, you will feel okay, or you won't feel okay. So the end result of a transaction will leave you feeling okay or not okay. The same thing with the person you're communicating with. If you're communicating with someone, at the end of the transaction or communication, they will either feel okay or not okay. So you could have a couple of possibilities there where both of you feel just fine after you've had your meeting or whatever, or both of you feel not okay, or one or the other doesn't feel okay. So he was very interested in how this would happen, and he came up with the idea that there were three ego states, and that as we grow up, we learn to play these roles. They're sort of roles that we can adopt and play. Even at early ages, we can play these roles. And the three roles are very common. One is the child role, so we can act like a child, and all of you know the sort of the basic scenario of a child. It's sort of fun-loving, out there trying to learn, not inhibited. So there's the natural, healthy child that you can imagine in your mind. We all have that ability to go to that place and be childlike. The other level is what Eric called the parent state. So you could think of someone who's parenting. They're watchful. They're concerned. They're trying to nurture. They're it may be disciplining when necessary, but they're there to protect and to care and to nurture. And it's sort of that role that people can go into when they're the natural caring parent. And the third ego state that we all have the ability to go to is this neutral adult state. And using Eric's model, he would say that this adult state for people as they grow up is the preferred state. So it's the state where you're neither being childlike and needing guidance, or being parental where you're trying to guide other people. It's sort of that middle ground where you're evaluating things, you're okay, you feel okay about yourself, and you communicate. So what can happen is that when you're communicating with another person, they may be in one of those three ego states. And you can just imagine, say, your last communication with someone at work. They may have been in a parental, authoritarian kind of mental state or ego role. They may have been communicating you right on, bang on, adult to adult, or they may have been childlike. So what happens in your day-to-day, you will switch between one of those three ego states, maybe. You might be childlike in the morning when you're waking up, and then switch to adult as you go to work. And then maybe at some point on your way back from work to home, you may switch into the parental state. Remember now, these are just roles. And he would look at them, Eric would look at them as mental states that you could slip into when you want to communicate in a particular way. So what can happen, you might communicate with someone as an adult, asking them what the time is. Hey, do you have the time? And they might communicate back as adult, and they might say, geez, let me check. Yeah, it's 3 o'clock. Or they might communicate back as a child, and you say, oh, what's the time? And they might say, oh, it's 3 hairs past the pimple, or some goofy joke, and blah, 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 and make a funny joke of it. Or they might reply back as a parent and say, what's the matter? Don't you have a watch? And please don't ask me for silly things like that. Just go find the time yourself. When this happens, you can get what we call cross communication. So when you're in an ego state, in one of those three, and you communicate with someone, they'll either communicate back at that same ego state that you communicated with, or they'll switch to another. And that's called a cross transaction. Here's another example of a transaction between two adults that we can just consider. There's really no right or wrong. There is a situation where the transaction or the communication could be a little bit more beneficial, because the end result we're looking at is smiles on both faces, so where both people feel okay. So you could have a parent-to-child transaction where both people feel okay. And you could have a parent-to-parent. You could have a child-to-child and an adult-to-adult. So it's not that one of these are automatically going to generate a state of being happy or unhappy. It's the quality of it. And one aspect of this, it's called reciprocal. So if the person in the parent ego state communicates with someone who's in the child, and they communicate, they stay in those ego states, and there isn't where one has to switch out of ego states. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are at a party and one person is going to be the hostess. And so they are kind of shifted in a kind of parental ego state where they're organizing things and finding out what everyone brought for the party, and they're telling people where to put their coats, and if someone is drinking too much, maybe that person goes and gets the key. So they're acting like the parent. So they're in that parent ego state. The people in the party are just having fun, and they've accepted that this person is going to be in that role. So there's really no conflict. Everyone's cool with the fact that whoever is going to be hosting the party is going to be a little bit of a parent that night and maybe not drink, maybe be the designated driver if they're going out. So you can sort of see right there that sometimes it's okay to play the parent role, not a problem if everyone agrees. Same thing with people who are being in the childlike role. Perfectly okay if that's what you choose to do and if it's appropriate for the setting. So the example of the party, it was appropriate that one person be more of a watching, protecting, keeping an eye on everyone, while everyone was just happily being in the child state. So again, it's not whether one of these states is right or wrong, it's whether it's appropriate for the setting and if the communication between you and the other person is reciprocal. So if you're okay being the child or playing the role of the child and they're okay being in that parent state and both of you are in agreement with it, then the likelihood it's going to be a nice, clean transaction. The key here is to pay attention to when you don't feel okay, and there's an expression in the TA world called that slimy, slippery feeling. If you've had a transaction, communication with someone, and you're walking away afterwards and you don't feel okay, you just have that slippery, slimy feeling. You've been slimed, to use a very professional term. So something happened in that communication that probably made you shift out of your adult role and become more childlike, or you may have been forced to become the parent. It's very important to understand that people might get you to play a role of parent when they want to be childlike, or someone might sort of push you into becoming childlike when they want to become parental, or if they just want another child to play with them. So these roles, people will flip into them for various reasons, and the most common reason is to get attention. So even as adults, we want attention and recognition. If you think back to your last meeting at work or situation, there will be people who will shift in and out of these roles to gain attention. So that's very important. Bottom line, though, is recognizing these various ego states, and when you're being shifted or being pushed out of an adult state into one of the other two, if you don't want to go, if you don't want to shift out of your adult state, become childlike, or shift out of your adult state and become parental, then you're not likely to feel okay at the end of it. So recognizing what's going on in your setting, your communication with your peers, or with your children, recognizing when you're being pulled or pushed out of that adult state. So I guess that's the take-home of this. So how this relates to our day-to-day, you will feel okay, and your best state is when you are in the adult and you're not being pulled or pushed into the child state or the adult state, a parent state, where you can stay communicating. And when you're going through your day, one of the things I've been suggesting is just be aware of when you are pulled out of that I am okay state into a not okay state. And this is one of the models that you can use, that after a transaction, if you don't feel okay, just go back and replay that last transaction in your mind and say, was I forced out of being in my adult state? Was I forced to be a child and someone was parenting me? Or they will decide forced to become the parent and discipline someone else, and people can do that too. So we'll look at another example, perhaps next week, of how these three ego states, parent, adult, and child, can lead to some very interesting situations. And normally they're all healthy, but you can get a situation where the child is adaptive or the parent is contaminated. And we'll talk about adaptive ego states and contaminated ego states and some interesting games that can happen there. Google it if you want. It's Eric Bren, B-E-R-N-E, and the book is Games People Play. So we'll leave it there. And it's a big topic area, but I just wanted to introduce it. And you can go online, and there's lots of information on transactional analysis, sometimes called TA. Okay, well, I hope you found that introduction of value, and we'll continue on with some of the other aspects next week when we come together again.